The US has been granted access to more military bases on China's doorstep.
Some changes arrive with speeches, parades, and banners. This one did not. Picture a humid morning on a provincial airstrip in northern Luzon. The sun hasn't burned off the mist yet. Jeepneys rattle by. A pair of ground crew roll a fuel hose across cracked concrete. There's no ceremony, no crowd, no music. Only the quiet choreography that comes before aircraft liftoff. Checklists, hand signals, the soft click of a fuel cap. It looks ordinary because it is. But ordinary scenes are often where strategy becomes real. Overnight, the map of the Philippines quietly shifted from 5 sites to 9 open doors for the U.S. military under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, known as EDCA. No permanent American bases, no foreign flagpoles planted in Philippine soil, just rotational access and pre-positioned capability spread across places that most Filipinos recognize by name. Basa, Fort Magsaysay, Lumbia, Antonio Bautista, Mactan Benito Ibuen, and now Naval Base Camilo Ocias, Lalo Airport, Camp Melchor de la Cruz, and Balabac Island. If you trace those names on a map, you trace the country's anxieties and ambitions. Northern Luzon looks straight toward the Taiwan Strait. Palawan faces the West Philippine Sea, where fishermen, Coast Guard crews, and patrol boats live the daily reality of contested waters. These are not abstract points in a strategy slide. They are towns, airfields, fishing grounds, and supply routes where families build futures and leaders shoulder hard choices. So what does it actually mean to open these 9 doors without reopening the era of permanent foreign bases? Why did this happen now? And how will it change the rhythm of deterrence, diplomacy, and daily life along some of the most watched sea lanes on Earth? Today we're going to slow down, strip away the noise, and look at the logic. Not the slogans, not the fear, and not the wishful thinking, just the choices a democracy makes when geography won't wait. Because in the Indo Pacific, timing isn't a detail. Timing is strategy. To understand why 9 access points matter, you have to start with history. Because the alliance between Manila and Washington has always been written in equal parts memory and terrain. In 1951, with the region still recovering from World War II and the Cold War taking shape, the Mutual Defense Treaty bound the Philippines and the United States to consult and act in common danger. For decades, that promise took a very visible form. Clark Air Base in Subic Bay. American aircraft thundered out of Pampanga. U.S. ships filled Zambales with jobs, commerce, and controversy. The alliance lived in steel and concrete, and it also lived in debate. By the early 1990s, 2 things happened. The Cold War receded, and Mount Pinatubo erupted, damaging Clark. Filipinos were asking harder questions about sovereignty and strategic independence. In 1991, the Philippine Senate voted against renewing the U.S.-based leases. A year later, the large permanent bases closed. The alliance did not end, but the form it took changed fundamentally. Presence would no longer mean permanence. What followed was not a breakup, it was a recalibration. The Visiting Forces Agreement, the VFA, rebuilt a legal bridge so troops could train together, respond to disasters, and cooperate on counter-terror missions. Then in 2014, EDCA updated the alliance again for a world where threats often arrive as gray zone coercion, maritime harassment, missile overflight, and sudden crises rather than tank divisions. EDCA's core idea is simple: access, not ownership. Equipment can be pre-positioned. Troops can rotate in. Infrastructure can be improved inside Philippine bases, under Philippine authority. And yet, for nearly a decade, EDCA was deliberately modest. 5 sites spread across Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, and Palawan. Then in 2023, 4 more locations were added. The timing wasn't random. Tensions in the West Philippine Sea escalated. Military flights near Taiwan surged. Philippine fishermen faced water cannons and blocking maneuvers. Regional planners began asking a hard, practical question. If a crisis erupts, can you move fast enough to matter? That last question is the beating heart of EDCA. It's less about headcounts and more about hours. Less about territory held and more about options available. Distributed access shortens response times, expands surveillance lanes, and, crucially, gives civilian authorities and militaries the logistical backbone to deliver help when the Philippines faces its other relentless adversary: typhoons, earthquakes, and volcanoes. So when people say, this is about the U.S. returning, the better answer is, this is about the Philippines choosing to keep the Mutual Defense Treaty credible without reopening the political wounds of permanent basing, choosing to value speed and flexibility in a neighborhood where minutes can change outcomes, and choosing to invest in infrastructure that serves both deterrence and disaster relief. Because in this country, those missions are often separated only by weather. A lot of commentary misses the quiet, technical choices that make EDCA politically durable at home and strategically useful abroad. 3 points are often lost. First, EDCA is designed to be acceptable because of what it prohibits, not just what it allows. There are no permanent U.S. bases, no exclusive foreign zones, no American commander in charge of a Philippine camp. EDCA upgrades happen inside Philippine military facilities. Command and ownership remain in Manila's hands. This is not a cosmetic detail. It is the difference between a partner and a landlord. And that distinction matters in a democracy shaped by colonial history and proud of its sovereignty. Second, deterrence here is communicated through posture, not press releases. Dispersed, rotational access across 9 locations complicates any adversary's planning. It creates uncertainty about where response would originate, how fast it could arrive, and how long it could be sustained. That uncertainty is the core of deterrence because it raises the risk of miscalculation before anyone makes a reckless move. Visibility isn't the point, availability is. Third, the dual-use nature of EDCA is not a public relations fig leaf. It's the operating concept. The same runway that takes a military transport can receive relief flights after a super typhoon. The same fuel storage that sustains exercises can keep helicopters flying when landslides cut mountain roads. The same logistics hub that feeds a joint training brigade can feed a displaced community. In a country hit by multiple typhoons each year, humanitarian capacity is not a side mission. It's a national requirement. There's also a political reality that rarely gets said out loud. Local consent is as decisive as national strategy. Communities near EDCA sites carry worries about becoming targets, about cultural frictions, about economic promises that don't reach ordinary families. If EDCA is to last, tangible local benefits, jobs, infrastructure access, disaster response practice, and transparent oversight must be visible. Otherwise, an agreement designed to avoid past mistakes could stumble into new ones. Finally, there's the regional balance. China frames EDCA's expansion as containment. Manila frames it as insurance against uncertainty. ASEAN states watch carefully, trying to protect economic ties with Beijing while avoiding a security vacuum. In this environment, clarity matters. Clear rules about access. Clear proof that facilities are Philippine first. Clear demonstration that escalation is not the mission. Readiness is. Let's turn the map into motion. Imagine 3 everyday scenarios where EDCA's 9-site architecture matters. Not as theory, but as logistics that save hours. Scenario 1. A typhoon slams northern Luzon. Landslides block highways. Bridges are out. Communications are spotty. Lalo Airport becomes a forward lifeline. Its value is speed. C-130s rotate in with water filtration units, generators, tents, and medical teams. Camp Melchor de la Cruz, farther inland, provides depth, staging space for relief convoys, helicopter refueling, and a secure command post that isn't exposed to coastal flooding. Basa and Mactan Benito Ebuen push additional sorties and airlift as weather windows open. None of this requires a permanent foreign base. It requires prepared runways, fuel, and practice teams. Scenario 2. A maritime standoff escalates in the West Philippine Sea. A Philippine patrol is harassed near contested waters. Antonio Bautista Air Base on Palawan keeps a watch to the west. Balabac Island, looking over vital sea lanes, extends surveillance. A rotational U.S.-Philippine detachment uses pre-positioned supplies to extend on-station hours for aircraft and maritime assets. Meanwhile, Fort Magsaysay, the largest training area, supports joint coastal defense drills that had been rehearsed for months, not days. The message is subtle and deliberate. Response can be sustained without rushing ships and planes from far away. Scenario 3. A regional contingency narrows the timeline near Taiwan. No one wants crisis. But if air and naval movements spike in the Luzon Strait, Naval Base Camilo Ocias and Lalo shorten the gap between intelligence and action. Whether that action is monitoring, resupply, or humanitarian evacuation planning. Crucially, the presence is rotational and legal under EDCA and the VFA. Ownership, command, and sovereignty remain Philippine. Now step back and see the architecture. Basa Air Base, Luzon, protects skies near Metro Manila, a logistics springboard for central Luzon. Fort Magsaysay, Nueva Ecija, the joint training engine, amphibious rehearsals, air assault practice, and coastal defense drills that build habits, not headlines. Lumbia Airport, Mindanao, a launch point for counter-terror operations and, just as important, disaster response where storms hit hard. Antonio Bautista, Palawan, nearest to the West Philippine Sea, eyes on maritime activity, hub for air and surface patrol coordination. Mactan Benito Ibuan, Cebu, a central air mobility node, moving people and cargo fast. Naval Base Camilo Ocias, Cagayan, a northern window onto an unavoidable corridor between the Pacific and the South China Sea. Awareness and reach. Lalo Airport, Cagayan, rapid mobility especially for lift and relief into the north. Camp Melchor de la Cruz, Isabela, inland depth for staging, logistics, and training away from coastal exposure. Balabac Island, Palawan, overlooks vital sea lanes, a vantage point where commerce and security intersect. Individually, each site is modest. Together, they form a distributed arc, not clustered, not redundant, stretching from the Taiwan facing north to the contested western seas. Think of it as a time machine. It doesn't move geography closer, but it moves help sooner. Behind the scenes, infrastructure is the workhorse. Runways extended and hardened. Fuel storage expanded so helicopters and transports don't waste time cycling back to distant depots. Shelters built to withstand storms and protect aircraft. Warehouses that can stock humanitarian supplies as easily as spare parts. Much of this investment stays with the armed forces of the Philippines, regardless of who rotates through next month. And it ripples outward. Construction jobs now, commercial utility later, faster relief always. On the training side, exercises like Balikatan stopped being photo ops years ago. They knit together standard operating procedures. How a platoon calls in air support, how a maritime patrol feeds data to an air tasking cell, how logisticians prioritize pallets when the clock is cruel. That integration is what turns access into capability. Because when it matters, you don't want teams meeting for the first time on the tarmac. Finally, remember the most ordinary but decisive factor: habits. If pilots routinely refuel at forward strips, if medics already know where the generators sit, if truck drivers have driven the route from Mactan to a coastal ferry landing in the rain, then a crisis arrives in a place that people already understand. That reduces stress, mistakes, and time. In other words, it turns a policy into muscle memory. Here is the plain reading. EDCA is the Philippines choosing speed over spectacle, flexibility over footprint, and options over optics. It is not a return to the 1980s. It is not a passive acceptance of foreign basing. It is a pragmatic recognition that geography has a veto over wishful thinking. And that veto can only be challenged by being positioned before the storm. From a deterrence perspective, distributed access does three things well. 1. Shortens warning to action timelines. The closer the runways, fuel, and crews, the more likely a measured, credible response arrives in time to matter, whether that response is support, surveillance, or de-escalation. 2. Complicates adversary planning. Multiple modest nodes force potential adversaries to consider more variables. Which site? What capacity? How long can it be sustained? Complexity by itself deters rash moves. 3. Sustains the non-military missions that build domestic legitimacy. If communities see an airfield that brings disaster relief, jobs, and training, and not just foreign uniforms, support deepens. Deterrence without legitimacy is brittle. Deterrence with legitimacy is durable. But realism demands we also say the risks out loud. Perception risk. Sites near Taiwan or contested waters draw attention. Some will argue proximity equals entanglement. The counterpoint is clear but must be communicated relentlessly. Preparedness prevents panic. Readiness reduces risk. Local friction risk. Communities want more than assurances. They want transparent oversight, clear rules, and visible benefits. Without these, skepticism can harden. Escalation narrative risk. External actors will frame EDCA as militarization. The antidote is discipline in operations, messaging, and proportionality, and proof that dual-use infrastructure is serving ordinary Filipinos when typhoons hit. So where do I land? EDCA, expanded to 9 sites, is the right evolution for a country that needs capability without conceding control. It blends Philippine sovereignty with allied support, and it does so in a way that keeps doors open to diplomacy. The agreement's success, however, will be measured not in speeches, but in metrics. Response time to disasters and maritime incidents. Integration quality during joint drills. Do teams operate seamlessly, or do seams still show? Local outcomes. Jobs created, schools and hospitals supported by better connectivity, community access to improved airfields for medical evacuation. Crisis management results. Fewer close calls at sea, faster de-escalation, clearer lines of communication. The bigger picture is this: speed is strategy. In the Indo Pacific, where distances are vast and windows are narrow, being early is often the only way to avoid being too late. EDCA is how the Philippines and the US are choosing to be early, without repeating the past. If you take nothing else from this, take a framework you can use the next time this topic fills your feed. What EDCA is: a Philippine-led agreement that allows rotational US access to Philippine bases, a way to pre-position fuel, parts, and equipment so response time shrinks. A dual-use infrastructure program that strengthens disaster relief and day-to-day military readiness. A deterrence posture built on distribution, not domination. What EDCA is not. It is not a return to permanent foreign bases. It is not a transfer of command or ownership. It is not a guarantee of escalation. It's a tool designed to prevent it by closing gaps in time and space. How to read the headlines going forward. When you see a story about an EDCA site, ask 4 questions. 1. Does this make the Philippines faster when it matters? 2. Are local communities seeing benefits and protections in practice, not just in press releases? 3. Are training exercises improving genuine interoperability or just producing photo ops? 4. Is the message to the region disciplined and clear? Preparedness without provocation, signals to watch, funding and build-out, hardened shelters, runway upgrades, fuel storage. These are the quiet indicators that access is becoming capability. Exercise scale and realism, amphibious drills, coastal defense, air mobility operations using multiple sites in sequence, humanitarian outcomes, how quickly relief flights land after the next super typhoon, How many communities rely on improved EDCA logistics during floods or earthquakes? Diplomatic temperature. Hot rhetoric cools when posture is predictable and professional. Watch if close encounters at sea decrease as coordination and presence increase. What this means for ordinary people. For fishermen in Palawan, it means more eyes on dangerous waters and faster help when incidents occur. For air crews in Cebu and Pampanga, it means more reliable logistics and safer infrastructure. For families in Isabela and Cagayan, it means that when roads wash out, airfields and camps nearby can become lifelines. And for the nation, it means an alliance that is updated, bounded, and practical. An alliance that invests in Philippine capability without demanding a permanent American footprint. In short, EDCA's expansion is a bet that readiness and restraint together will keep the peace better than distance and delay. It's a bet worth placing, so long as the work stays grounded in the people who live near these sites and the leaders who will be held to account for how they are used. Maps don't move themselves. People do. Pilots, logisticians, local officials, engineers pouring concrete under sun and rain, and communities deciding whether this future belongs to them. The 9 EDCA sites aren't an end state. They're a promise that response will be faster, choices wider, and sovereignty clearer than before. I'm going to keep tracking how each site evolves, where the upgrades are happening, how exercises change the tempo, and whether the humanitarian side delivers for families when storms return. When new information emerges, I'll break it down with the same focus on context, trade-offs, and practical impact. If you live near one of these locations, or if you've worked in disaster response, the Coast Guard, or joint training, your perspective matters here. What benefits have you seen? What concerns need attention? Share your experience in the comments. Let's keep this conversation grounded in the people and places that make strategy real. Thank you for watching and for thinking beyond the headlines. If this helped you see the map differently, consider liking and subscribing so you don't miss the next breakdown.